Power recognizes power. Eleanor Carter stood with quiet dignity as they denied her reserved seat at LeBlanc Manor. Just another black woman they could dismiss without consequence. Except she wasn't. Behind her graceful exit lay the shadow of her son, Damian Carter, silent majority owner of the very restaurant that humiliated her. They mistook his silence for weakness, his patience for surrender. Their mistake. As the city's most exclusive restaurant becomes ground zero in a war against high privilege, untruth becomes clear. Some slights aren't just personal, they're the first domino in a system's collapse. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The silver Bentley glided to a stop outside LeBlanc Manor, its polished exterior reflecting the golden glow of the restaurant's entrance lights. Eleanor Carter adjusted her pearl necklace, took a deep breath, and nodded to the chauffeur as he opened her door. At 62, Eleanor carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from decades of holding her head high in spaces that weren't always welcoming. "Thank you, Robert," she said, stepping onto the sidewalk in her modest heels. Her black dress was elegant but understated, chosen specifically for tonight's event, a celebration dinner her son had arranged for her birthday. LeBlanc Manor stood like a fortress of exclusivity on the corner of Fifth Avenue, its stone facade, and brass fixtures declaring its status as the most sought-after reservation in the city. Through the large windows, Eleanor could see the glittering chandeliers and the well-dressed patrons, most of whom were white and dripping with old money. As Eleanor approached the entrance, the doorman gave her a quick once-over, his smile faltering, slightly before he pulled open the heavy door. "Good evening, ma'am," he said, his tone professional but lacking warmth. The restaurant's interior was even more opulent than Eleanor had imagined. Cream-colored walls adorned with original artwork, tables covered in pristine white linen, and crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandeliers above. A pianist played softly in the corner, his fingers dancing across the keys of a gleaming grand piano. Conversations hushed as Eleanor walked in. Several patrons glanced her way, their expressions ranging from curiosity to mild surprise to barely concealed disdain. Eleanor ignored them all, her focus on the hostess stand directly ahead. From across the room, Gareth Simmons, the restaurant manager, watched Eleanor's entrance with narrowed eyes. At 48, Gareth prided himself on maintaining LeBlanc Manor's prestigious atmosphere. His slicked-back hair and impeccably tailored suit projected an air of authority as he whispered something to a nearby server before making his way toward the front. Eleanor reached the hostess stand and smiled at the young woman behind it. "Good evening. I have a reservation under Carter." She spoke clearly and confidently. The hostess, a blonde woman in her mid-20s named Amber, quickly scanned the leather-bound reservation book. Her finger traced down the list of names once, then twice. Her eyes flickered up to Eleanor, then beyond her to where Gareth now stood, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, I don't see that name here," Amber said, her voice slightly higher than normal. Eleanor maintained her smile. "It should be there. My son, Damian Carter, made the reservation. It's for the VIP table near the window, the one with the view of the garden." Gareth stepped forward then, a practiced smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. "Is there a problem, Amber?" "This lady is saying she has a reservation for the VIP table, but I don't see it in the book." Gareth turned to Eleanor, looking down at her with an expression that bordered on condescension. "I'm terribly sorry, Ms. Carter." Eleanor Carter. "Ms. Carter. There seems to be some confusion. The VIP table is reserved for one of our regular patrons tonight." He made a show of checking the reservation book himself. "I don't see your name here at all. Perhaps you've confused the date? Or the venue?" Eleanor's expression remained calm, though her eyes hardened slightly. "There's no confusion, Mr. Simmons, Gareth Simmons, general manager of LeBlanc Manor. Mr. Simmons, my son, Damian Carter, specifically reserved that table for my birthday dinner tonight. Perhaps you should check again." A flicker of recognition crossed Gareth's face at the mention of Damian's name, but he quickly masked it. I've checked thoroughly, Miss Carter. There's no reservation under that name. He paused, then added with a smirk. We do have a table available near the kitchen, if you'd still like to dine with us tonight. Eleanor was about to respond when the front doors opened again, and a tall, slender woman in her early 30s entered. Her blonde hair was pulled back in an elegant updo, and she wore a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Several patrons immediately recognized her, and whispers of Veronica Langley rippled through the dining room. Gareth's demeanor transformed instantly. Ms. Langley, so wonderful to see you again. He practically bounded across the lobby to greet her, leaving Eleanor standing at the hostess stand. Gareth, darling, Veronica purred, air-kissing both his cheeks. I hope you've saved my favorite table for me. Of course, of course. The VIP table is ready and waiting just as you like it. Eleanor watched this exchange, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. The VIP table, her table, was suddenly available for someone else. Veronica glanced briefly at Eleanor, taking in her appearance with a dismissive sweep of her eyes before turning back to Gareth. Wonderful. I've brought the Australian ambassador with me tonight. He's just parking his car. Gareth beamed. We'll prepare a place for him as well. He offered his arm to Veronica and began leading her toward the VIP table, the very one he had just claimed was unavailable. As they passed, Eleanor spoke up. Excuse me, Mr. Simmons. I believe that's the table my son reserved for me. Gareth stopped, turning to Eleanor with barely concealed annoyance. As I explained, Miss Carter, there must have been some mistake. That table has been reserved for Ms. Langley for weeks. But I just heard you say it was her favorite table, not that it was reserved. A hush fell over the nearby tables as diners sensed the brewing confrontation. Gareth's smile became strained. Perhaps you misheard. Now, if you'll excuse us. I didn't mishear anything, Eleanor said quietly but firmly. You told me the table was reserved for a regular patron. You didn't say it was already booked by Ms. Langley. You're lying, Mr. Simmons. Veronica looked affronted. Gareth, who is this woman? Before Gareth could answer, a young black waiter named Daniel Williams approached. He had been watching the exchange from nearby, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Mr. Simmons, Daniel said, his voice low but clear, I saw the reservation book earlier today. There was definitely a booking for Carter at the VIP table. Gareth's face darkened. Return to your station, Daniel. This doesn't concern you. Daniel hesitated, his eyes meeting Eleanor's briefly before he reluctantly moved away, disappearing into the kitchen. This is ridiculous, Gareth muttered. He turned to Eleanor, dropping all pretense of politeness. Look, that table is now occupied. I've offered you an alternative. Take it or leave it. Several patrons were openly staring now. Eleanor could feel the weight of their gazes, some sympathetic, others simply entertained by the spectacle. She straightened her back, smoothed her dress, and looked directly at Gareth. I'll leave it, she said, her voice carrying just enough for the nearby tables to hear. But my son will be very interested to hear about how LeBlanc Manor treats its guests. Gareth waved a dismissive hand. Yes, yes. We're terribly sorry for the inconvenience. Eleanor turned to leave, her dignity intact despite the public humiliation. As she passed the bar, she caught sight of Daniel again, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of respect. Outside, Eleanor took a deep breath of the cool evening air. Only then did she allow her hands to tremble slightly as she reached for her phone. She dialed a number she knew by heart. After 2 rings, a deep voice answered. Mom? What's wrong? Aren't you at the restaurant? Damien, she said, her voice steady despite everything. We need to talk about LeBlanc Manor. Damien Carter's penthouse office overlooked the city skyline, the lights of downtown creating a glittering backdrop behind his imposing desk. At 38, Damien had built an empire that spanned real estate, technology, and strategic investments. Forbes had recently named him one of the 50 most influential CEOs in America, though he rarely gave interviews or sought the spotlight. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, phone pressed to his ear, his reflection showing a tall man with broad shoulders and intense dark eyes. His tailored suit couldn't hide the tension in his body as he listened to his mother's account of what had happened at LeBlanc Manor. "Give me an hour," he said finally, his voice controlled and measured. He ended the call and placed the phone carefully on his desk, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. Damien pressed the intercom button on his desk. "Lisa, I need you in my office. Now." Less than a minute later, Lisa Morgan strode through the door. At 42, Lisa had been Damien's right hand for nearly a decade. Her gray suit was as no-nonsense as her expression, and she carried a tablet that rarely left her side. "What's happened?" she asked, immediately sensing his mood. "My mother was just humiliated at LeBlanc Manor. They gave away her reserved table to some socialite named Veronica Langley." Lisa's eyebrows rose slightly. "Veronica Langley? The senator's niece?" "I don't care if she's the president's daughter," Damien replied, moving to his desk and unlocking a drawer with his thumbprint. "Pull up everything we have on LeBlanc Manor. Ownership structure, management, financial records, everything." Lisa nodded, her fingers already tapping at her tablet. "You own a majority stake in that restaurant, don't you?" 62%, Damien confirmed, extracting a file from the drawer, a fact that Gareth Simmons seems to have forgotten. He opened the file, revealing documents detailing his silent investment in the upscale establishment. "Most of the staff doesn't know you're the majority owner," Lisa reminded him. "You wanted to keep it that way to see how they operated when they didn't know who was watching." "And now we know," Damien said grimly. Lisa's tablet pinged with an incoming message. "Speaking of watching," she said, "we just received an anonymous tip on the employee line you set up for LeBlanc Manor." Damien looked up sharply. "What does it say?" "It's from someone named Daniel Williams, a waiter. He says this isn't the first time Gareth has done this. He claims there's a pattern of racial discrimination in how they seat guests and which reservations mysteriously disappear." Damien's jaw tightened. "Get me everything on this Daniel Williams, and I want all complaints filed against LeBlanc Manor in the last 2 years. Official and unofficial." While Lisa worked, Damien paced the office, his mind racing. LeBlanc Manor hadn't been a financial investment for him. It had been a test. As one of the few black executives at his level, Damien had learned early on to create systems that allowed him to see the unfiltered truth about how spaces operated when they didn't know who was really in charge. Lisa looked up from her tablet. "Daniel Williams, 26, has worked at LeBlanc Manor for 14 months. Clean record, punctual, well-liked by customers according to their internal reviews. He's put himself through culinary school working there." "Good to know," Damien said. "What about those complaints?" "I'm compiling them now, but there's a pattern emerging. Several guests of color have reported similar experiences. Reservations, lost, being seated in less desirable locations, longer wait times for service. Most complaints were handled directly by Gareth, and none made it to the official record." Damien nodded, unsurprised. "And Richard Albright? Has our figurehead owner been involved in any of this?" Lisa shook her head. "From what I can tell, he's as clueless as ever. Hands off, collects his dividends, shows up for photo ops. The trust fund heir who loves having his name on things but doesn't want to do the work." "Perfect," Damien murmured. He picked up his phone and dialed. After a few rings, a cheerful voice answered. "Richard Albright speaking." "Richard, it's Damien." "Carter." "Damien, my favorite silent partner. How are you? How's that tech venture in Seattle coming along?" "We need to talk about LeBlanc Manor, in person. Tomorrow morning, my office, 9 a.m. There was a pause on the line. "Is everything okay? The numbers looked great last quarter." 9 a.m., Richard. Don't be late." Damien ended the call without waiting for a response. Lisa raised an eyebrow. "You're not going to tell him what happened?" "Let him sweat overnight," Damien replied. He reached for the phone again. "Now, let's run a little test." He dialed LeBlanc Manor's reservation line. A polite voice answered. "LeBlanc Manor, how may I help you?" "Hello," Damien said, altering, his tone to sound like a typical businessman. "I'd like to reserve a table for tomorrow evening. Something nice. The VIP table if it's available." "Of course, sir. May I have your name?" David Wilson, Damien replied, making up a name on the spot. Let me check availability for you, Mr. Wilson. There was a brief pause. The VIP table is available tomorrow at 7 p.m. Would that work for you? Perfect, Damien said, catching Lisa's. I'll take it. After ending the call, he smirked. So the VIP table is suddenly available when a man with a white-sounding name calls. Lisa nodded, her expression grim. Classic pattern. I've found 17 similar complaints in the last year alone. Gareth has been very careful to keep them off the official records, but they exist in customer service emails and social media posts. Damien moved back to the window, looking out at the city below. We have all we need then. Almost. There's one more thing you should know about Veronica Langley. Damien turned, his attention caught by Lisa's tone. She's not just a socialite. Her family controls 3 of the largest luxury hotel chains in the country, and her uncle isn't just any senator. He chairs the Committee on Urban Development. If you go after LeBlanc Manor publicly, she could make things difficult for some of our projects, Damien finished. More than difficult. More than. The Thompson Street development needs that zoning change, and her uncle could kill it with a phone call. Damien nodded. I'm aware of the risks. Lisa studied him carefully. If you go in now, they'll know you're coming. Let them bury themselves. First, Damien's phone lit up with a text from his mother. Don't do anything rash, son. I'm fine. A slight smile crossed his face as he read it. Eleanor had always known him too well, had always been his moral compass, even when his first instinct was to bulldoze obstacles in his path. We're going to watch them implode first, he said finally, pocketing his phone. I want to see exactly how deep this rot goes before I cut it out. Lisa nodded, relieved. Smart move. How do you want to proceed? First, I'm going to visit LeBlanc Manor myself, incognito. I want to see firsthand how they operate when they don't know who I am. He paused, thinking. And I want hourly reports on both Gareth Simmons and Veronica Langley. Every skeleton in their closets, every connection they have, every weakness we can exploit. Consider it done, Lisa replied, already typing notes. And Lisa, Damien added, his voice taking on a harder edge. Make sure my mother gets the best table at James Porter's tomorrow night. Tell them I'll be joining her, and I'll remember how they treat her. After Lisa left, Damien stood alone in his office, the city lights creating shadows across his face. He picked up a framed photograph from his desk, himself as a young boy, standing beside Eleanor outside their modest home in a neighborhood most of his current business associates would never visit. She was wearing her nurse's uniform, looking tired but proud as she rested a hand on his shoulder. Eleanor had worked double shifts for years to put him through college. She had taught him to stand tall, to work twice as hard, and to never let anyone make him feel small. She had also taught him patience and strategy, lessons he would now put to good use. Damien placed the photograph back on his desk and reached for his phone again. It was time to make another call, this one to his personal tailor. Jackson, I need something different. Not my usual style, something less expensive looking. I need to be invisible tomorrow night. As he outlined his requirements, Damien's mind was already racing ahead, mapping out the moves and counter-moves of the game that was about to begin. By the time he hung up, his plan was taking shape. The restaurant thought they held the power. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Meanwhile, across town, Daniel Williams paced his small apartment, debating whether he had made a terrible mistake by sending that anonymous tip. He had watched too many injustices slide by at LeBlanc Manor, had bitten his tongue too many times, as Gareth Simmons manipulated reservations and treated people of color with barely disguised contempt. Seeing Eleanor Carter dismissed so brazenly had been the final straw. Something about her quiet dignity in the face of such obvious discrimination had awakened something in Daniel, a conviction that silence was no longer an option. Still, he knew Gareth suspected him of sympathizing with guests who complained. Just last week, he had been passed over for a promotion to head waiter, despite having more experience than the white server who got the position. His phone buzzed with a text from his supervisor. Schedule changed. You're working tomorrow night. VIP section. Daniel stared at the message, a mixture of dread and determination settling in his stomach. The VIP section meant he would be directly under Gareth's watchful eye all night. It could be punishment, or it could be coincidence. Either way, he had crossed a line today. There was no going back now. At LeBlanc Manor, the evening continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Veronica Langley held court at the VIP table, her laughter occasionally rising above the general murmur of conversation. Gareth moved through the dining room like a conductor, ensuring everything ran smoothly for the elite clientele. Only a sharp observer would have noticed how he checked his phone more frequently than usual, or how his smile seemed slightly strained when he passed the now occupied VIP table. Only someone who knew him well would recognize the subtle signs of unease in his otherwise confident demeanor. By midnight, as the last guests departed and the staff began cleaning up, Gareth retreated to his office and poured himself a generous glass of scotch. Tomorrow would be business as usual. The Carter woman wouldn't be back, and her complaints, if she made any, would be handled like all the others, efficiently buried and forgotten. He had built LeBlanc Manor into the most exclusive restaurant in the city by understanding what the elite wanted: to be among their own kind, to feel special, to be insulated from the changing world outside. Richard Albright paid him handsomely to maintain that exclusivity, and he had never questioned Gareth's methods. One disgruntled woman wouldn't change anything. Gareth was certain of it. He couldn't have been more wrong. The next morning, Damien arrived at his office earlier than usual. Lisa was already there, armed with 2 coffee cups and a thick folder. "Everything you asked for," she said, handing him both the coffee and the folder. Gareth Simmons has been at LeBlanc Manor for 8 years. Before that, he managed 3 other high-end restaurants, never staying more than 3 years at each. "Let me guess," Damien said, opening the folder. He left each one just as complaints started to surface. "Exactly," Lisa confirmed. "He's good at covering his tracks, but the pattern is there if you know where to look. And there's more. He's been skimming from the restaurant. Small amounts, but it adds up." Damien raised an eyebrow. "Now that's interesting. Does Albright know?" "Doubtful. The accounting is deliberately convoluted. I only found it because I knew what to look for." "And Veronica Langley?" Lisa's expression tightened. "That's where things get complicated. Her family's not just wealthy, they're connected. 3 senators on speed dial, judges, media executives. They've buried at least 2 discrimination lawsuits against their hotels in the past 5 years. Damien took a long sip of his coffee, processing this information. So this goes beyond one arrogant restaurant manager. Much beyond, Lisa agreed. This is how the system protects itself. People like Gareth are just the visible face of it. A notification appeared on Damien's phone, a reminder of his meeting with Richard Albright in 30 minutes. "Let's see what our figurehead owner has to say for himself," Damien said, closing the folder. "And then tonight, we'll see LeBlanc Manor for ourselves." As he waited for Albright to arrive, Damien recalled his mother's words from years ago. When he faced his first major business challenge, the most powerful move is the one they don't see coming. Tonight, he would begin a game that Gareth Simmons and Veronica Langley wouldn't even realize they were playing until it was too late. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the power suit, the designer watch, and the air of authority that normally surrounded Damien Carter. In their place were a department store blazer that hung slightly too loose at the shoulders, an unremarkable tie, and scuffed shoes that had seen better days. Damien studied his reflection in the mirror of his penthouse bathroom, satisfied with what he saw, a forgettable, middle management type, the kind of man who would aspire to dine at LeBlanc Manor as a special treat rather than a regular indulgence. Totterin looked like an accountant having a midlife crisis, Lisa remarked, leaning against the doorframe with her ever-present tablet in hand. Damien adjusted his tie, deliberately making it slightly crooked. Perfect. The meeting with Albright went as expected? He was clueless, Damien confirmed. Claimed he had no idea about any discrimination complaints. Said Gareth handles the day-to-day trivialities while he attends charity galas and plays golf. And you didn't tell him you were going undercover tonight? The fewer people who know, the better, Damien slipped a cheap ballpoint pen into his breast pocket, another calculated detail. You have the reservation confirmation? Lisa nodded. Under the name David Wilson, just as you requested. And I've activated the recording function on your watch and the microphone in your tie clip. Everything will be transmitted back to our secure server. Good. Damien checked his watch. A simple Timex rather than his usual Patek Philippe. It's time. 30 minutes later, a nondescript rideshare pulled up to the curb outside LeBlanc Manor. Damien paid the driver and stepped out, taking in the restaurant's imposing facade with fresh eyes. The doorman gave him a cursory nod. Nothing like the deferential greeting Damien typically received when arriving at high-end establishments. It was already working. Inside, the hostess, the same blonde woman from the previous night, glanced up from her podium. Her assessment was quick and dismissive. Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation? Yes, David Wilson at 7 o'clock, Damien replied, adopting a slightly hesitant tone, as if he were unused to such surroundings. She scanned the reservation book, her expression shifting to mild surprise when she found his name. Oh yes, Mr. Wilson, I see you requested the VIP table. If it's available, Damien said. The hostess exchanged a look with another staff member before turning back to Damien. I'm sorry, but that table has actually been reserved for another party this evening. But we have a lovely table near the bar that I think you'll enjoy. Damien feigned disappointment, but nodded. I understand. The bar table will be fine. As the hostess led him through the dining room, Damien observed everything with a trained eye. Near the entrance, a well-dressed white couple was being escorted to the coveted window section. Meanwhile, a black family in equally fine attire was seated in a dimly lit corner near the kitchen doors, despite the many empty tables in better locations. Damien's table at the bar was noisy and cramped, positioned directly in the path of servers rushing back and forth. He ordered a drink and settled in to watch the restaurant dynamics unfold. Within 20 minutes, Damien witnessed 3 more seating arrangements that followed the same pattern. White guests received prime tables, while people of color were relegated to less desirable spots. The preferential treatment extended to service as well. Damien noted that his water glass remained empty for 15 minutes before a harried server finally refilled it. At 7:30, Damien watched as a white man in a designer suit entered the restaurant alone. The man approached the hostess without a reservation, engaged in brief small talk, and was promptly escorted to the supposedly unavailable VIP table. The injustice was so blatant that Damien had to maintain a conscious effort to keep his expression neutral. Can I get you anything else, sir? A young black waiter had appeared at Damien's side, Daniel Williams. Up close, Daniel appeared even younger than his 26 years, his expression carefully professional despite the evident tension in his shoulders. Just the menu, please, Damien replied, studying Daniel carefully. This was the man who had risked his job to report Gareth's discrimination. As Daniel handed him the menu, he subtly surveyed the room before speaking in a low voice. Fair warning, the kitchen's backed up tonight, so orders for this section might take a while. His eyes conveyed a different message. The delay would be deliberate, not circumstantial. I appreciate the heads up, Damien said meaningfully. Daniel gave a slight nod and moved away, intercepted almost immediately by Gareth Simmons, who emerged from his office with the swagger of a man secure in his authority. Gareth said something to Daniel, his tone inaudible, but his body language unmistakably condescending. Daniel's shoulders tensed, but he nodded and continued toward the kitchen. Halfway, through his overpriced and underwhelming meal, Damien decided to up the ante. He signaled for Daniel. I'm curious about investing in restaurants, Damien said when the waiter approached. This place seems quite successful. He pulled out a business card, one Lisa had created for his David Wilson persona, listing him as a financial consultant. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. I'm afraid I'm not the person to discuss that with, sir, but I can see if the manager is available. I'd appreciate that, thank you. 5 minutes later, Gareth Simmons approached Damien's table, his demeanor transformed from the previous night. Where he had been dismissive to Eleanor, he was now all smiles and charm. Mr. Wilson, I understand you're interested in our little operation. Gareth extended his hand, which Damien shook firmly. Gareth Simmons, General Manager. David Wilson, Damien replied. And yes, I've been looking to diversify my portfolio. Restaurants seem like an interesting opportunity. Well, you've certainly come to the right place. Gareth pulled up a chair, without waiting for an invitation. LeBlanc Manor is the crown jewel of the city's dining scene. Our clientele is selective. I've noticed, Damien said carefully. How do you maintain such an exclusive atmosphere? Gareth leaned in conspiratorially. Between us, it's all about curation. We have systems in place to filter out the wrong crowd. Systems? Damien prompted. Little tricks of the trade? Selective. Reservation policies, strategic seating arrangements. Gareth smirked. Our regulars appreciate knowing they'll be dining among their own kind. Damien's smartwatch was capturing every word. Fascinating. And the owner approves of these methods? Richard Albright. Gareth laughed dismissively. He's happy as long as the profit margins stay healthy. He leaves the details to me. And they do stay healthy, I assume? Very. In fact, we've been able to increase our margins through some creative adjustments. Creative adjustments? Damien raised an eyebrow. Gareth glanced around before lowering, his voice further. Let's just say certain tables have variable pricing that doesn't always make it into the official records. Nothing illegal, of course, just business optimization. Damien nodded as if impressed by this admission of fraud. Very shrewd. It's all about knowing your market, Gareth replied, clearly proud of himself. For example, when certain types of customers do make it through our filtration system, they typically don't question an extra service charge or a mandatory gratuity. Certain types? Gareth gestured vaguely. You know what I mean. I think I do, Damien said, struggling to contain his disgust. Well, this has been enlightening. If you're serious about investing, I could arrange a private tour, show you our books, Gareth offered, sliding a business card across the table. I'd like that, Damien replied, slipping the card into his pocket. I'll be in touch. As Gareth moved away to greet some newly arrived guests, Daniel returned to clear Damien's plate. As he leaned in to take the dish, he discreetly slipped a folded napkin onto Damien's lap. Damien waited until Daniel had gone before unfolding the napkin under the table. Written in hasty pen strokes were the words, "Watch your back." Below it was a brief note. He's done this before. They always disappear. Damien carefully refolded the napkin and tucked it into his pocket. He paid his bill, noting the discretionary service charge that hadn't been mentioned by his server, and left a generous cash tip specifically for Daniel, tucked partially under his water glass, where other staff wouldn't immediately spot it. As he prepared to leave, Damien overheard a conversation from the next table. Gareth was speaking to a group of white businessmen, his voice just loud enough to carry. It's getting harder to maintain standards these days, Gareth was saying. Everyone's screaming about inclusivity and diversity. But our regular clients come here precisely because we understand what real exclusivity means. The men chuckled appreciatively, raising their glasses in a toast to standards. Damien walked out of LeBlanc Manor with his jaw clenched but his mind clear. He had seen and heard enough. The corruption ran deeper than even he had suspected, not just discrimination but likely financial fraud as well. Outside, he texted, "Lisa, you get all that?" Her response came seconds later. "Every word. It's worse than we thought." "Start putting together the report," Damien replied. "It's time for Phase 2. As his rideshare pulled away from the curb, Damien caught a glimpse of Daniel exiting through the restaurant's side door, phone pressed to his ear, his expression anxious. Damien made a mental note to ensure Daniel was protected when everything came crashing down. Because after tonight, there was no question in Damien's mind. LeBlanc Manor was going to fall, and Gareth Simmons was going down with it. Lisa Morgan's office at Carter Enterprises was a testament to her methodical nature. 3 computer monitors displayed different aspects of the LeBlanc Manor investigation: financial records, employee testimonials, and social media analytics. On the wall, a timeline of events connected by red string looked like something from a detective show. She barely looked up when Damien entered, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "I've been compiling everything we have. The recordings from last night are gold. Gareth practically confessed to financial fraud and discriminatory practices on tape." Damien loosened his tie. Back in his regular attire, the power and authority he carried was evident in every movement. "What about the financial angle? Can we prove the skimming?" "Better than that." Lisa swiveled to face him, satisfaction evident in her expression. "I cross-referenced credit card charges from minority guests against white patrons with similar orders. The discretionary charges were applied to over 80% of non-white customers, but less than 5% of white ones." "Systematic discrimination," Damien nodded. "Exactly what we need." "There's more," Lisa continued, turning back to her screens. "I found 3 former employees who are willing to testify about Gareth's seating policies. And Daniel Williams has provided copies of reservation lists showing how bookings from people with ethnic-sounding names mysteriously disappeared. Is Daniel safe? Gareth must suspect he's the leak." "He's being careful. Says Gareth has been watching him closely since your mother's incident, but he hasn't been fired yet." Lisa handed Damien a thick folder. "Here's the complete report. It's comprehensive and damning." Damien flipped through the pages, his expression hardening with each new revelation. "Good work. Now we move to the next phase." "Are you sure about this approach?" Lisa asked cautiously. "We could just fire Gareth quietly and implement new policies." "This isn't just about one racist manager," Damien replied, his voice firm. "It's about exposing the entire system. Gareth is just a symptom of a deeper disease. And Veronica Langley needs to learn that her family connections won't protect her from consequences." Lisa nodded, understanding. "The anonymous media leak is ready to go. I've packaged everything into a compelling narrative. Exclusive restaurant charges black patrons more, hides discrimination behind fake reservations. 3 major news outlets have already expressed interest based on my hints. Send it," Damien instructed. "And activate the social media campaign simultaneously." With a few keystrokes, Lisa launched the carefully orchestrated plan they had spent the past 24 hours developing. Within minutes, selected clips from Damien's recordings began circulating on social media platforms, accompanied by infographics showing the discriminatory pricing patterns. "Now we wait," Damien said, moving to the window. "It won't take long." He was right. By mid-afternoon, LeBlanc discrimination was trending. Former patrons began sharing their own experiences of discrimination at the restaurant, creating a cascade effect that soon caught mainstream media attention. Damien's phone rang. Richard Albright, the panic evident in his voice before he even spoke a word. "Damien, have you seen what's happening? The restaurant is being destroyed on social media. They're saying we discriminate, that we charge black customers more. It's a nightmare." "I'm aware of the situation, Richard," Damien replied calmly. "We need to do something. Issue a denial, hire a PR firm." "Actually," Damien interrupted, "I've called an emergency shareholder meeting for 5 o'clock today. As majority owner, I have that right." "Majority owner? What are you—" Understanding dawned in Albright's voice. "The investment group. That was you? You own LeBlanc Manor?" 62%, Damien confirmed. "And I'll see you at 5. He ended the call, turning to Lisa, who was monitoring the unfolding social media storm. "Any word from inside the restaurant?" "My source says it's chaos," Lisa replied. "Reservations are being canceled, the phone is ringing off the hook with reporters, and Gareth is in his office having a meltdown. He's already suspended Daniel, claiming he's the source of the leak." Damien's eyes narrowed. "Make sure Daniel is taken care of. Full salary protection and legal support if needed." Another notification caught Lisa's attention. "Breaking news. They've just closed the restaurant for today, citing a water main issue. It's a transparent attempt to avoid the media circus forming outside." "Too late for that," Damien observed as footage appeared on one of Lisa's screens showing news vans parked outside LeBlanc Manor. "The story has legs." By 4:30 p.m., Damien was seated at the head of the conference table in his downtown office. Lisa sat to his right, a stack of documents before her. The door opened, and a flustered Richard Albright entered, followed by Gareth Simmons, whose usual confidence had been replaced by barely contained panic. "What is the meaning of this?" Gareth demanded, then caught himself remembering he was addressing a major investor. "Mr. Carter, I apologize for the tone, but this is clearly a misunderstanding that spiraled out of control." "Sit down, Mr. Simmons," Damien replied coolly. "We have much to discuss." "I don't understand what's happening," Albright complained, taking a seat. "One minute we're running the most prestigious restaurant in the city, the next we're being accused of racism on national news." "Not accused," Damien corrected. "Exposed. And there's one more guest joining us shortly." As if on cue, the door opened again, and a furious Veronica Langley stormed in, her perfect composure shattered. "This is slander. My family's legal team is already preparing." She stopped short when she saw Damien. "Who is this? Why is he here?" "Veronica Langley. Meet Damien Carter," Albright said weakly. "Apparently, he owns 62% of LeBlanc Manor." Veronica's eyes widened with recognition. "Carter? As in Eleanor Carter," Damien finished for her. "The woman you helped humiliate 2 nights ago. My mother." A tense silence filled the room as understanding dawned on their faces. "This is absurd," Gareth finally sputtered. "One seating misunderstanding and you destroy a restaurant's reputation? This is vindictive and one misunderstanding?" Damien cut him off, his voice dangerously quiet. "Lisa, please distribute the reports." Lisa handed each person a thick document. "This details 27 documented instances of racial discrimination at LeBlanc Manor in the past 6 months alone. It includes testimony from former employees, statistical analysis of seating patterns, and evidence of discriminatory pricing." "This is all circumstantial," Gareth protested weakly as he flipped through the pages. "I was there last night, Mr. Simmons," Damien replied. "As David Wilson, the potential investor you were so eager to impress. I recorded everything you said about your filtration system and creative adjustments to pricing." The color drained from Gareth's face. That's illegal. You can't record someone without their consent." "Actually, this state has one-party consent laws for recordings," Lisa interjected smoothly. "Completely legal." Albright looked shell-shocked. "Damien, I had no idea. You have to believe me. I never authorized any discrimination policies." "Your ignorance doesn't absolve you of responsibility, Richard," Damien replied. "You were content to collect profits while turning a blind eye to how they were generated." Veronica, who had been silently seething, finally spoke. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Carter? Money? An apology? Because if you think you can strong-arm the Langley family—" "What I want," Damien interrupted, "is accountability. Starting with the immediate termination of Mr. Simmons and a complete overhaul of LeBlanc Manor's policies and practices." "You can't fire me," Gareth protested. "Only the managing director has that authority, and that's me," Damien finished. "As majority shareholder, I've appointed myself managing director, effective immediately." He slid a document across the table. "Richard, these are the papers transferring your remaining ownership shares to me." Albright stared at the document in disbelief. "You expect me to just sign away my restaurant? This is extortion." "This is business," Damien corrected. "You have 2 options. Sell me your shares at the very generous price outlined in that agreement, or face the legal and public relations nightmare that's coming. The financial fraud alone could result in criminal charges." "What financial fraud?" Albright asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lisa tapped a key on her laptop, and a screen on the wall displayed a complex financial analysis. Selective overcharging of minority customers, unreported cash transactions, inventory shrinkage that somehow always resulted in profits for management. "It's all there, and the IRS would be very interested." Albright's shoulders slumped in defeat. "I really didn't know." "Sign the papers, Richard," Damien said, his tone softening slightly. Walk away with your reputation relatively intact and a fair compensation for your shares. With a shaking hand, Albright signed the transfer documents. As for you, Mr. Simmons, Damien continued, turning to Gareth, you're fired, effective immediately. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the building and collect your keys and access cards to the restaurant. Gareth stood, knocking his chair backward. You'll regret this. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Actually, I do, Damien replied calmly. A small man who abused what little power he had to hurt people who looked like him. He nodded toward the door. Goodbye, Mr. Simmons. After Gareth had been escorted out, Damien turned his attention to Veronica, who had watched the proceedings with cold calculation. Ms. Langley, while I can't fire you from your own life, I can ensure that your role in this incident doesn't go unnoticed. Veronica laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Please, by tomorrow this will be old news. My family has weathered bigger scandals than a restaurant seating mishap. Damien leaned forward. Perhaps. But I wonder how your uncle the senator would feel about the 5 discrimination lawsuits your family hotels have quietly settled in the past 3 years, or the labor violations at your Miami property. All these details are in the second part of our media package, ready to be released. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Veronica's face. You're bluffing. Would you like to find out? Damien reached for his phone. One call, and the second wave of stories goes live. A tense silence stretched between them before Veronica spoke again. What do you want from me? Nothing, Damien replied, surprising her. I simply want you to understand something. The world is changing, Ms. Langley. The old ways of doing business, of treating people, are ending. You can evolve, or you can become irrelevant. Your choice. Veronica stood, gathering her designer purse with forced composure. You have no idea what you've started, Mr. Carter. On the contrary, Damien replied. I know exactly what I'm doing. This isn't just about one restaurant or one incident. This is about changing the system. After Veronica had departed, her threats hanging in the air, Lisa turned to Damien. She won't let this go. The Langleys are vindictive, and they have connections we can't match. Let her come, Damien said, his resolve unwavering. We've only just begun. Lisa's phone buzzed with an incoming message. The news about Gareth's firing has already leaked. Social media is exploding again. She showed Damien her screen, where Dr. Justice for Eleanor was now trending alongside Dr. LeBlanc discrimination. And Daniel? Damien asked. He's worried. Says some of Gareth's loyal staff are blaming him for the scandal. Damien nodded thoughtfully. Offer him a position as consultant for the restaurant's reorganization. His insider knowledge will be valuable, and it gets him away from potential retaliation. Already drafted the offer letter, Lisa replied with a slight smile. And I've scheduled a press conference for tomorrow morning, where you'll announce the complete overhaul of LeBlanc Manor's management and policies. Perfect, Damien said, standing to look out at the city skyline. And make dinner reservations. For my mother and me at LeBlanc Manor for tomorrow night. The VIP table. Lisa raised an eyebrow. You want to dine there during all this chaos? I want to send a message, Damien replied, that things are already changing. After Lisa left to execute his instructions, Damien remained at the window, watching. The sun set over the city. His phone vibrated with an incoming call from Eleanor. I saw the news, she said when he answered. The entire staff fired? Damien, that wasn't necessary. Not the entire staff, Damien corrected. Just the management team that enabled the discrimination. The servers, kitchen staff, and support personnel will keep their jobs under new leadership. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. This is bigger than just what happened to me, isn't it? It always was, Damien confirmed. What happened to you was the catalyst, but this is about changing how these exclusive spaces operate, making them truly inclusive without sacrificing quality or experience. Be careful, son, Eleanor warned. People like Veronica Langley don't take defeat gracefully. I know, Damien replied. That's why this isn't over. In fact, it's just beginning. After ending the call, Damien pulled up the preliminary designs for the rebranded LeBlanc Manor on his tablet. The exclusive restaurant would soon become something different, a place that maintained its excellence while welcoming all who could afford its admittedly high prices, regardless of their appearance or background. It was a small victory in a much larger war, but it was a start. Damien knew that Veronica's parting threat wasn't empty. The Langleys and others like them wouldn't relinquish their power and privilege without a fight. They would come for him, his businesses, his reputation. Let them come, he thought. He had truth on his side, and the tide of history was turning. What had begun as an act of disrespect toward his mother had uncovered a system of discrimination that had persisted for too long in the shadows. As night fell over the city, Damien Carter prepared for the battles ahead. This was just the opening, move in a much larger game, one that would shake the foundations of power in the city and beyond. Meanwhile, across town, Veronica Langley was already making calls, activating a network of powerful allies who understood what was really at stake. This wasn't just about one restaurant or one humiliating incident. It was about preserving a system that had served them well for generations. The war had begun, and neither side was prepared to surrender. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Damien's private conference room, casting long shadows across the polished oak table. The atmosphere was tense as Damien studied the three people seated opposite him. Richard Albright fidgeted with his tie, his usual bluster deflated by recent events. Gareth Simmons maintained a veneer of confidence, though the slight tremor in his hand as he reached for his water betrayed his anxiety. And then there was Veronica Langley, immaculately dressed in a cream designer suit, her posture perfect, her expression revealing nothing except a slight curl of disdain at the corner of her mouth. "Thank you all for coming," Damien said, his voice measured and calm. Lisa sat beside him, tablet at the ready, observing everyone with sharp eyes. "As if we had a choice," Veronica replied coolly, checking her manicure. "Let's not pretend this is a cordial business meeting, Mr. Carter." Damien offered a thin smile. "Fair enough, Ms. Langley. Then let's get to the point." He opened a folder before him. "LeBlanc Manor is now under my complete ownership. The management team has been dismissed, and will be implementing comprehensive anti-discrimination policies effective immediately." Gareth leaned forward, his rehearsed contrition painfully obvious. "Mr. Carter, I want to apologize personally for any misunderstanding regarding your mother's reservation. It was a regrettable mistake in our booking system. Nothing more." "A booking system that somehow consistently affected patrons of color?" Damien asked mildly. "That's simply not true," Gareth protested. "We pride ourselves on welcoming all guests who meet our standards of—" "Please," Damien interrupted, "spare me the performance. I was there, Mr. Simmons. I heard you explain your filtration system quite clearly." Albright, who had been sweating profusely throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "Damien, please, we can fix this. New policies, sensitivity training, whatever you want. Just tell me how to make this go away." "It's not going away, Richard," Damien replied. "The restaurant is mine now. The papers you signed yesterday transferred your remaining shares to me." "Under duress," Albright protested weakly. "Your signature looks perfectly steady to me," Lisa remarked, sliding a copy of the document across the table. Throughout this exchange, Veronica had remained silent, studying Damien with calculating eyes. Now she straightened and spoke with quiet authority. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Carter. My family has significant interests in this city, interests that intersect with yours in ways you might not fully appreciate." Damien met her gaze steadily. "Is that a threat, Ms. Langley?" "Simply a reality check," she replied with a shrug. "My uncle chairs the Urban Development Committee that's reviewing your Thompson Street project next month. My cousin sits on the board of First National Bank, which holds several of your company's loans." She smiled thinly. "Actions have consequences beyond a single restaurant." Before Damien could respond, his phone buzzed. Lisa glanced at the incoming message and whispered something in his ear. Damien's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, stepping away from the table, "to take the call privately." Lisa turned to the three guests. "While Mr. Carter is occupied, let me be clear about one thing. Carter Enterprises has documented every discriminatory practice at LeBlanc Manor. We have recordings, financial records, and witness testimonies. If any of you attempt to retaliate against Mr. Carter or his businesses, that information goes public. All of it." Veronica laughed softly. "Ms. Morgan, isn't it? You've worked for Damien for what, 10 years now? You should know that scandals are temporary, but power is permanent. My family has weathered controversies before." "Not like this," Lisa replied confidently. Damien returned to the table, his expression now grave. "That was my legal team. It seems someone has filed an anonymous complaint with the state licensing board alleging fraudulent practices at LeBlanc Manor. Practices that occurred under your management, Mr. Albright." Albright's face went pale. "What? But you said—" "I didn't file the complaint," Damien clarified. "Someone else has entered the game." Veronica's composure cracked slightly. "What are you talking about?" Damien activated the large screen on the wall, displaying a breaking news story. The headline read, "Exclusive restaurant chain under investigation for systemic discrimination." The article doesn't name LeBlanc Manor specifically, Damien explained. It focuses on the Langley Hospitality Group's chain of luxury hotels and restaurants. Veronica stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is your doing." "I assure you it's not," Damien replied calmly. "But it seems our little conflict has attracted attention from others who have experienced discrimination at establishments controlled by your family." He pressed a button on the conference table, and the door opened to admit a man in his early 30s carrying a briefcase. "This is Jacob Bennett, my head of security," Damien introduced him. "He's discovered something interesting about past lawsuits against your properties, Ms. Langley." Jacob placed his briefcase on the table and removed a thick folder. 5 discrimination lawsuits in the past 3 years, all settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements. But what's interesting is that the plaintiff's original complaints disappeared from court records. "That's not possible," Albright muttered. "It is when you have a judge in your pocket," Jacob replied. "A judge who happens to be Veronica's godfather." Veronica's eyes flashed with fury. "You have no proof of any impropriety." "Actually, we do," Damien said, sliding an audio device onto the table. He pressed play, and a male voice filled the room. "Veronica, darling, the Davis complaint is taken care of. All references to racial discrimination have been expunged from the record. Your father can stop worrying." The color drained from Veronica's face. "Where did you get that?" "Mr. Davis was more thorough than you gave him credit for," Damien replied. "He recorded every conversation related to his case, including that call between you and Judge Wilson. He couldn't use it because of legal technicalities, but he held on to it. Insurance, he called it." Gareth, who had remained silent during this exchange, suddenly looked panicked. "I had nothing to do with any of that. The restaurant policies were all approved by—" "Shut up, Gareth," Veronica snapped. Damien leaned forward, hands clasped before him. "Here's how this will proceed. I now own LeBlanc Manor outright. Its discriminatory practices will end, and it will become a model of inclusive excellence. Mr. Simmons is already terminated. Mr. Albright will retain his reputation as long as he cooperates with the coming investigation." "And me?" Veronica asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "That depends on you," Damien replied. "My concern is the restaurant and addressing the wrongs done there, including to my mother. I have no interest in a prolonged war with your family, Ms. Langley." "Then you shouldn't have started one," she replied icily. Damien's expression remained calm. "I didn't start this, but I will finish it if necessary." He slid a contract across the table. "This is a mutual non-interference agreement. You and your family stay away from my businesses, and I'll keep the evidence of judicial misconduct private." Veronica didn't even glance at the document. "My family doesn't respond well to blackmail, Mr. Carter." "Consider it a business proposal then," Damien countered. "A way for both of us to walk away cleanly." Veronica stood, gathering her purse. "You have no idea what you've started." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "You know, your mother was lucky. She was merely embarrassed. Others who cross my family don't fare as well." After she departed, Gareth and Albright exchanged nervous glances. Can we go now? Albright asked weakly. Mr. Albright, you're free to leave. Mr. Simmons, please remain. There are some financial discrepancies we need to discuss. After Albright scurried out, Gareth slumped in his chair. What do you want from me? My reputation is already destroyed. I want the truth, Damien replied. About how deep the discrimination went and who else was involved. Gareth laughed bitterly. You think this was just me? The entire system is built this way. The Langleys and families like them. They create the rules, and people like me just enforce them. That doesn't absolve you of responsibility, Lisa pointed out. I know that, Gareth admitted, surprising them. But you should know what you're up against. Veronica wasn't bluffing. Her family has destroyed people for much less than what you've done. Let me worry about the Langleys, Damien said dismissively. Now, about those financial records. An hour later, after Gareth had admitted to years of financial manipulation at the restaurant and signed a full confession, Damien and Lisa were alone in the conference room. He rolled over quickly, Lisa observed. Self-preservation, Damien replied. He knows he's finished in this industry. The confession is his only bargaining chip against criminal charges. Lisa's tablet chimed with an alert. The press release about the restaurant's reorganization has gone out. Social media response is overwhelmingly positive. And the Langleys? Quiet for now, Lisa reported. But their lobbyist has scheduled meetings with 3 city council members who oversee development permits. They're moving fast. Damien nodded, unsurprised. So are we. Is the press conference set for tomorrow? Yes, and Eleanor has confirmed she'll attend. Daniel Williams has accepted our consulting offer as well. Good, Damien said, standing to look out at the city. Phase 1 complete. You know Veronica won't stop, Lisa warned. That threat about your mother wasn't subtle. Damien's expression hardened. I've already arranged additional security for Eleanor. The Langleys are used to people backing down at the first sign of pressure. They don't know what to do with someone who fights back. They're powerful enemies to make, Lisa persisted. We're always enemies, Lisa, Damien replied quietly. They just didn't know it until now. Across town, Veronica Langley entered the wood-paneled study of her family's estate, where her uncle, Senator William Langley, sat behind an antique desk, reviewing documents. It's worse than we thought, she announced without preamble. He has the recording of my conversation with Judge Wilson. The senator removed his reading glasses, his expression grave. How? Davis must have given it to him. Doesn't matter now, the damage is done. What does he want? The senator asked, his voice measured. He claims he just wants the restaurant and to end the discrimination there. Offered me a non-interference agreement. Senator Langley scoffed. People like Carter don't stop with one victory. He's testing his power, seeing how far he can push. I warned him, Veronica said, pacing the study. Made it clear we could hurt his business interests. And? He didn't blink. Either he's overconfident or he's prepared for a fight. The senator was quiet for a moment, then pressed a button on his desk phone. Janet, get me Thomas Reynolds at the Chronicle, and schedule calls with our friends at First. National and the Zoning Board. He turned back to Veronica. Carter needs to learn that some lessons come with a higher price than others. Damien's alarm chimed at 5:30 a.m. as usual, but he was already awake, reviewing overnight news alerts on his tablet. The press conference announcing the transformation of LeBlanc Manor was scheduled for 10 a.m., and everything was in place. He scrolled through his emails, noting with satisfaction the positive responses from community leaders and business associates. His phone rang, Lisa calling at an unusually early hour. Turn on Channel 9, she said without preamble. Damien grabbed the remote and switched on the television. A somber news anchor was speaking. Exclusive report questioning the business practices of Damien Carter, CEO of Carter Enterprises. Sources allege that Carter used intimidation tactics to force the sale of LeBlanc Manor, raising concerns about predatory acquisition methods. That didn't take long, Damien remarked, his voice calm despite the slanderous report. The Langleys must own someone at Channel 9. It gets worse, Lisa replied. Check your email. The Thompson Street zoning request has been flagged for additional review, a process that could take months. Damien absorbed this news silently. The Thompson Street development was a major project, affordable housing in an area that desperately needed it. Delaying it would cost millions and could jeopardize the entire initiative. That's just the beginning, Lisa continued. I've received calls from 3 board members who suddenly can't make today's press conference. They cited scheduling conflicts, but it's obvious they've been pressured. Expected, Damien said. Anything else? Yes. A reporter from the Chronicle called asking for comment on allegations that you've engaged in racial tokenism in your hiring practices. They're running a story titled The Hypocrisy of Damien Carter's Diversity Claims. Damien laughed without humor. So the playbook is character assassination and business obstruction. Predictable. We should delay the press conference, Lisa suggested. Give us time to counter these narratives. No, Damien replied firmly. That's exactly what they want, to keep us on the defensive. The press conference proceeds as planned. If some board members can't attend, we'll highlight those who had the courage to show up. After hanging up, Damien showered and dressed with deliberate care, selecting one of his finest suits. As he adjusted his tie, he received a text from his mother. Just saw the news. Are you sure about this path? He replied simply, nevermore. Certain. See you at the press conference. Damien arrived at his office to find Lisa waiting with a stack of reports. Her expression was grim. First National Bank called. They want to review the terms of our current loans. And 3 of our smaller investors have requested urgent meetings. The Langleys are pulling every string they have, Damien noted, skimming through the reports. Have we heard from Daniel Williams this morning? Lisa's expression shifted to concern. That's another issue. He didn't show up for our scheduled meeting, and he's not answering his phone. Damien looked up sharply. Send Jacob to his apartment. Now. While they waited for news about Daniel, Damien and Lisa prepared for the press conference. The media attacks continued throughout the morning, each hour bringing a new allegation or insinuation about Damien's business practices, personal life, or motives in acquiring LeBlanc Manor. They're trying to bury us in mud, Lisa observed as they watched another news segment questioning Damien's sudden interest in social justice. Let them, Damien replied. It only demonstrates their desperation. His phone buzzed with a message from Jacob. Williams's apartment empty. Neighbors say he left in a hurry last night. No signs of struggle, but his phone was left behind. Damien showed the message to Lisa. Find him. Use whatever resources necessary. You think the Langleys? I don't know. Damien interrupted. But Daniel is key to our case against LeBlanc Manor's discrimination. His disappearance right before our press conference isn't coincidental. At 9:30 a.m., as they prepared to leave for the press conference venue, Damien received an anonymous email. Walk away before it's too late. Attached was a dossier containing personal information about his mother, his close associates, and details of his daily routines, information that could only have been gathered through illegal surveillance. Damien forwarded the email to his security team without comment, then turned to Lisa. Let's go. We have a press conference to give. Despite the coordinated media attacks and the pressure applied to potential supporters, the press conference proceeded as planned. Damien stood at the podium with Eleanor at his side, his bearing confident and unapologetic. Good morning, he began, his voice steady. Yesterday, I became the sole owner of LeBlanc Manor restaurant. Today, I'm announcing its complete transformation into a new establishment, one that will maintain the excellence LeBlanc was known for, while ensuring that all guests are treated with equal respect, regardless of race, background, or appearance. Reporter interrupted. Mr. Carter, Channel 9 reported this morning that you forced the previous owner to sell under duress. Would you care to comment? Richard Albright sold his shares willingly after learning about discriminatory practices and financial irregularities under his management, Damien replied smoothly. He chose to do the right thing rather than face the consequences of those actions. And what about allegations that this is a personal vendetta because your mother was denied a table? Another reporter called out. Eleanor stepped forward, her dignity commanding instant respect. My experience at LeBlanc Manor was unfortunate, But it was hardly unique. Many have faced similar treatment, but lack the resources to do anything about it. My son is addressing a systemic problem, not seeking personal revenge. The press conference continued for 30 minutes, with Damien calmly parrying each accusation and insinuation. By the end, the narrative had begun to shift, with several reporters asking pointed questions about the Langley family's history of discrimination complaints. As they left the podium, Lisa whispered to Damien, "Two of our investors just called to reaffirm their support. They were impressed." "One battle won," Damien murmured. "But the war is just beginning." That afternoon, while meeting with his legal team about the Thompson Street zoning delay, Damien received an urgent call from his CFO. "We have a problem," the CFO reported. "The Westside development deal collapsed. Our partner, Brighton Properties, pulled out without explanation." Damien absorbed the news silently. The Westside project had been years in the making, a major commercial development that promised substantial returns. "How much do we lose?" he asked finally. "At least $12 million in sunk costs. But the bigger issue is that we're contractually obligated to break ground by next month or forfeit the land rights entirely." After ending the call, Damien stared out at the city skyline. In less than 24 hours, the Langleys had managed to delay one major project and potentially kill another. Their reach was impressive, their methods ruthless. Lisa entered his office, her expression troubled. "Still no sign of Daniel Williams, but we found this slipped under our office door." She handed him a plain envelope. Inside was a typed note. "Not everyone can afford principals. Some of us have families to protect." Below the message was an address in a neighboring city. "He ran," Damien concluded. "The Langleys must have threatened him or his family." "We can't blame him," Lisa said quietly. "He's not equipped for this kind of fight." "No, he isn't," Damien agreed. "Few people are. That's how they maintain their power, through fear and isolation." The day continued with more strategic attacks on Damien's business interests. A routine environmental review of another project suddenly turned critical. A key permit was mysteriously delayed. Two more investors requested meetings to discuss their concerns. By evening, it was clear that the Langleys were executing a coordinated campaign to isolate and undermine Damien on multiple fronts. Their message was clear: back down or be destroyed. Damien left the office late, declining his usual driver in favor of driving himself. As he navigated through evening traffic, his phone rang through the car's speaker system. It was Jacob. "Sir, we've identified the source of the surveillance on you and your mother. A private security firm called Blackstone Group. They have ties to several influential families, including the Langleys." "Keep digging," Damien instructed. "I want to know exactly who authorized it and how long it's been going on." As he ended the call and accelerated onto the highway, Damien pressed the brake pedal to adjust his speed for an upcoming curve, but nothing happened. He pressed harder, then pumped the pedal repeatedly. Nothing. The car continued to accelerate. Damien remained remarkably calm as he processed what was happening. The brake lines had been cut or disabled, a clear attempt on his life disguised as an accident. He downshifted rapidly, using the engine to slow the vehicle, and carefully navigated onto the shoulder, using the guardrail to gradually reduce his speed until the car finally came to a stop. His heart pounding, Damien called Jacob. "Someone tampered with my car. The brakes failed completely." "Where are you?" Jacob demanded, his voice tense with concern. "Highway 16 eastbound, about 5 miles past the Riverdale exit." "And Jacob? This wasn't a warning. They're playing for keeps now." When security arrived 20 minutes later, a thorough inspection confirmed Damien's suspicion. The brake lines had been professionally severed in a way that would cause them to fail gradually rather than immediately, designed to look like a mechanical failure rather than sabotage. Later that night, in the secure conference room of his downtown building, Damien met with his crisis team. The mood was somber as they reviewed the day's events. "The car sabotage crosses a line," Lisa said, her voice shaking slightly. "This isn't business anymore. It's criminal." "It's both," Damien corrected. "The Langleys are showing us how far they're willing to go to maintain their power and privilege." "We should go to the police," suggested Jacob. With what evidence? Damien asked. We can prove the brakes were tampered with, but not who did it. The Langleys are too smart to leave a trail. Then what's our move? Lisa asked. Because right. Now they're hitting us from all sides while we're just playing defense. Damien was quiet for a moment, his expression contemplative rather than defeated. Finally, he looked up, a new resolve in his eyes. We've been reactive, responding to their attacks as they come. That ends now. If they want a war, I'll give them one. What are you thinking? Lisa asked, recognizing the determination in his voice. The Langleys think they're untouchable because of their connections and influence. Let's prove them wrong. Damien turned to Jacob. I want everything on the Langley family. Business dealings, political contributions, tax records, personal scandals. Every skeleton, every questionable transaction, every abuse of power. That could take weeks, Jacob warned. You have 48 hours, Damien replied. Focus on Veronica and her uncle the senator first. They're leading this attack. He turned to Lisa. Contact our friends in the media, not the mainstream outlets the Langleys control, but the independent journalists who've covered corruption stories before. Feed them background information about the discrimination lawsuits against Langley properties. No direct accusations yet, just connect the dots for them. And the business attacks? Lisa asked. We absorb them for now, Damien said. The Thompson Street and Westside projects are important, but not critical. We can weather those losses, if necessary. What about your mother's safety? Jacob asked. If they're willing to tamper with your car, move her to the secure apartment tonight, Damien instructed. Full security detail, no exceptions. As the meeting concluded and his team departed to execute their assignments, Damien remained in the conference room alone. He pulled out his phone and found the photo he kept there, the same one from his desk of himself as a child with Eleanor outside their modest home. The Langleys had miscalculated. They thought their wealth and connections made them invincible, that their threats and attacks would force him to retreat. But they didn't understand what had shaped him, the lessons learned from watching his mother face discrimination with dignity, the resilience developed through years of fighting harder than his privileged peers just to earn a seat at the table. They had made this personal. Now he would show them exactly what that meant. Across town, in the Langley estate, Senator William Langley ended a phone call with a satisfied smile. The brake incident was a bit extreme, he remarked to Veronica, who sat across from him with a glass of whiskey. But effective. Our sources say Carter is pulling back, consolidating his resources. Good, Veronica replied. He needed to understand the real stakes. Indeed, by this time next week his Thompson Street project will be effectively dead, and his investors will be deserting him. A month from now, Carter Enterprises will be struggling to stay afloat. And LeBlanc Manor? Veronica asked. The senator smiled coldly. Once he's weakened enough, we'll find a way to force him to sell. Perhaps to a more appropriate owner. Neither of them noticed the blinking light on the senator's desk phone, indicating that the line had remained connected after the call ended. Nor could they know that every word of their conversation was being recorded by someone who had been expecting exactly this kind of incriminating exchange. The battle was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. 2 days after the brake sabotage incident, Damien stood before a wall of digital screens in the secure operations room he'd established on the top floor of Carter Enterprises. Each display showed different aspects of what his team now called Operation Checkmate: financial records, surveillance photos, media monitoring, and legal strategies. His normally pristine office had been transformed into a war room, with security personnel constantly moving in and out, bringing updates and receiving new instructions. Lisa entered, carrying a thick folder stamped "Confidential" in bold red letters. Jacob's team delivered, she announced, placing the folder on the conference table. Everything on the Langleys, as requested. Damien opened the folder and began reviewing its contents, his expression hardening as he turned each page. Their empire is even more extensive than we thought. And more corrupt, Lisa added. Tax evasion, bribery of public officials, falsified environmental impact studies. It's all there. The Langley Hospitality Group has systematically violated labor, laws and discrimination protections at nearly every property they own. What about Senator Langley specifically? Lisa pulled out a separate document. That's where it gets really interesting. He's been using his position on the Urban Development Committee to steer government contracts toward companies owned by Shell. Corporations that ultimately trace back to his family trust. It's sophisticated money laundering disguised as legitimate business. Damien nodded thoughtfully. And the recording from his office phone? Crystal clear, Lisa confirmed. His admission about the brake tampering is explicit enough to trigger a criminal investigation. Good. Damien stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. It's time for the next phase. Schedule the press conference for tomorrow morning. Lisa looked surprised. So soon? We haven't fully countered their business attacks yet. We're not going to, Damien replied. At least, not directly. The Langleys are expecting a conventional response. Legal countermeasures, PR defense, maybe some retaliatory business moves. We're going to hit them where they aren't looking. The full audit announcement, Lisa realized. Exactly. Damien turned from the window. Tomorrow morning, I'll publicly announce a comprehensive audit of LeBlanc Manor's financial records, including all transactions, vendor relationships, and special arrangements under the previous management. The Langleys will panic, Lisa warned. That audit would reveal connections to their other businesses. I'm counting on it, Damien replied with a slight smile. When people panic, they make mistakes. The following morning, camera crews from every major news outlet set up outside Carter Enterprises headquarters. The press conference had been billed simply as an important update on LeBlanc Manor's transformation, but rumors had been strategically leaked, suggesting that Damien might be announcing his resignation due to mounting pressure. Instead, when Damien stepped to the podium, flanked by his legal team and two representatives from a prestigious accounting firm, his demeanor was anything but defeated. Good morning, he began, his voice steady and confident. Today I'm announcing a full forensic audit of LeBlanc Manor's business practices under its previous management. This audit will examine every financial transaction, every vendor relationship, and every special arrangement made over the past 5 years. A murmur ran through the assembled reporters as they realized this was not the retreat they'd expected. Additionally, Damien continued, we've discovered evidence of potential criminal activity, including financial fraud, tax evasion, and discrimination as official policy. All findings will be shared with appropriate regulatory and law enforcement agencies. A reporter raised her hand. Mr. Carter, are you concerned about potential repercussions from powerful interests connected to the restaurant? Damien smiled slightly. I believe in transparency and accountability. If certain individuals find that uncomfortable, perhaps they should reconsider their business practices. Another reporter called out. Is this in response to the recent attacks on your business interests? This is in response to evidence of wrongdoing, Damien replied firmly. Nothing more, nothing less. As the press conference concluded, Lisa showed Damien her tablet, which displayed breaking news alerts from financial sites. Langley Hospitality Group's stock had dropped 8% in the 30 minutes since his announcement. The market was already connecting the dots. Back in the security of his office, Damien received an expected call from his newly installed encrypted phone line. That was a dangerous move, Carter. Senator Langley's voice was cold with barely controlled fury. You have no idea what you're meddling with. Actually, Senator, I know exactly what I'm dealing with, Damien replied calmly. A corrupt system. That's operated unchecked for too long. You think you can take on my family? We built this city, and extracted a heavy price for it, Damien countered. But times change, Senator. Even empires fall eventually. There was a pause before the senator spoke again, his tone shifting to something resembling grudging respect. What do you really want, Carter? Everyone wants something. Name your price. I want accountability. I want justice for people who've been systematically discriminated against. And I want your family to experience consequences for once in your privileged lives, the senator laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Noble sentiments, but we both know this sanctimonious crusade is about your wounded pride because your mother didn't get her table. That incident opened my eyes, Damien admitted. But this is about much more than one dinner reservation. Last chance, Carter. Back off, or what happened to your brakes will seem like a gentle warning. Damien's voice remained steady. You should know that this call is being recorded, Senator. And that mention of my brakes just corroborated the recording we already have from your office, where you discussed the sabotage with Veronica. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You're bluffing, the senator finally said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. Would you like me to play it for you? Damien offered. Or would you prefer to hear it for the first time when the FBI does? The call ended abruptly. Damien placed the phone down and turned to Lisa, who had been monitoring the conversation. He took the bait, she confirmed. His people will be scrambling now trying to contain the damage. And that's when they'll make their biggest mistake, Damien predicted. Have Jacob's team ready. The moment anyone attempts to access or alter records, at any Langley property, I want to know about it. The next 48 hours unfolded exactly as Damien had anticipated. The Langley organization mobilized to hide evidence of their connections to LeBlanc Manor and other potentially compromising business relationships. Security cameras that Jacob's team had covertly installed captured Veronica herself entering the restaurant's office late at night, removing files and attempting to access the computer system. Meanwhile, Lisa had identified a critical vulnerability in the Langley empire, Veronica's personal real estate company, which operated separately from the family's main hospitality business. Initial investigation suggested that it served as a vehicle for laundering money from the senator's questionable activities. It's their weak point, Lisa explained, showing Damien the complex financial flowcharts her team had assembled. The real estate company handles transactions that are technically legal but ethically dubious. If we pull on this thread, their entire financial structure could unravel. Damien studied the documents carefully. This is where we focus next, but we need to proceed carefully. Make them think we're not interested in the real estate angle at all. The strategy worked perfectly. While the Langleys directed their energy toward protecting their hospitality business and political connections, Damien's team quietly built a case around the real estate operations. 3 days later, Damien received a text from a number he didn't recognize. Found something big. Need to meet privately. Not safe to talk. DW. Daniel Williams had resurfaced. The meeting was arranged at a nondescript coffee shop across town. Damien arrived alone but had security positioned nearby. Daniel looked haggard, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting he hadn't slept properly in days. I'm sorry I ran, he said as soon as Damien sat down. They threatened my sister's kids, said they'd make sure she lost custody if I testified about the discrimination at LeBlanc. I understand, Damien replied. You did what you had to do to protect your family. Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. But that's not why I contacted you. After I left town, I remembered something from my time at the restaurant. Twice a month, Veronica Langley would have private meetings in the VIP room after hours. Not dinner meetings. She'd bring documents and different people would come in to sign papers. What kind of documents? Real estate contracts, I think. I served them drinks once and overheard Veronica talking about property transfers and keeping it off the books. I didn't think much of it at the time. Damien nodded slowly. Those meetings? Were they always on the same days? Yeah, the second and fourth Tuesday of each month. And get this, they never appeared in the reservation system. Gareth handled them personally. This was the final piece. Damien needed confirmation that Veronica had been using LeBlanc Manor as an unofficial office for her questionable real estate dealings, keeping the transactions away from official scrutiny. Daniel, would you be willing to make an official statement about what you saw? The young man hesitated, then nodded. My sister moved her kids to stay with our aunt in another state. They're safe now, and I'm tired of being afraid. With Daniel's testimony securing the connection between Veronica's real estate operations and LeBlanc Manor, Damien executed the next phase of his plan. Rather than exposing everything at once, he arranged a private meeting with Veronica under the pretense of negotiating a truce. The meeting took place in a neutral location, a conference room at a downtown law firm. Veronica arrived flanked by 2 attorneys, her composure perfect despite the pressure she must have been feeling. I appreciate you agreeing to meet, Damien began politely. Let's skip the pleasantries, Veronica replied coldly. What are you offering? Damien slid a document across the table. A compromise. I'll halt the public audit of LeBlanc Manor's finances and limit the scope to operational practices only. Nothing that would expose the restaurant's broader connections. Veronica's eyes narrowed with suspicion. And in exchange? Your family stops interfering with my business interests. The Thompson Street development proceeds without further reviews, and the media attacks cease. That's all? Veronica asked incredulously. After everything that's happened? I'm a businessman, Ms. Langley. Prolonged conflicts benefit no one. I've made my point about discrimination at LeBlanc Manor. Now I'm ready to move forward. Veronica studied him carefully, clearly searching for the trap. Finding none obvious, she allowed herself a small, triumphant smile. I'll need to discuss this with my uncle, of course. Of course, Damien agreed smoothly. I'll expect your answer by tomorrow. As anticipated, Veronica and Senator Langley interpreted Damien's offer as a sign of weakness, a retreat disguised as a compromise. They accepted the terms with thinly veiled satisfaction, believing they had successfully intimidated him into backing down. What they didn't realize was that Damien had never intended to expose LeBlanc Manor's connections to their empire through the restaurant audit. That had been a diversion. The real attack came 24 hours after they signed the agreement, when an independent journalist published a devastating exposé on Veronica Langley's real estate company, complete with documentation of fraudulent transactions, money laundering, and connections to illegally obtained government contracts. The article included testimony from Daniel Williams about the after-hours meetings at LeBlanc Manor, financial records showing suspicious property transfers, and most damaging of all, a recording of Veronica explaining to a client how to structure a transaction to avoid regulatory scrutiny. The story exploded across all media platforms. By nightfall, the FBI had announced a formal investigation into both Veronica's company and Senator Langley's activities. 3 of the Langleys' closest political allies issued statements distancing themselves from the family, and the Langley Hospitality Group's stock plummeted to a 5-year low. In a final masterstroke, Damien released the recording of Senator Langley discussing the brake sabotage to law enforcement, along with the forensic evidence Jacob's team had collected from the damaged vehicle. By morning, an arrest warrant had been issued for the senator on charges of attempted homicide. Watching the news coverage from his office, Damien felt no triumph or satisfaction, only a grim sense that justice was finally being served. The system that had protected the Langleys and others like them for generations was being exposed for what it truly was, a corrupt network designed to maintain power and privilege at the expense of others. Lisa entered with the latest updates. Senator Langley was taken into custody an hour ago. Veronica is reportedly trying to flee the country, but her passport has been flagged. Damien nodded, turning away from the television. And the fallout for their associates? It's spreading like wildfire, Lisa confirmed. 2 judges have recused themselves from pending cases, a city councilman has announced his resignation, and 3 executives from companies with ties to the Langleys have taken temporary leaves of absence. The whole network is collapsing, Damien observed. Like dominoes, Lisa agreed. They've operated with impunity for so long that they never developed contingency plans for exposure. No one expected to be held accountable. Damien looked out at the city skyline, thinking about how many other powerful families like the Langleys still operated in the shadows, maintaining systems of exclusion and discrimination. This victory, significant as it was, represented just one battle in a much larger war. What about LeBlanc Manor? Lisa asked. The rebranding is complete, but after all this publicity, Damien turned back to her with newfound resolve. We proceed as planned. The restaurant reopens next week under its new name and new management. It will serve as a reminder that change is possible, even in the most entrenched systems. And a demonstration of what happens when someone like Eleanor Carter isn't seated at her reserved table, Lisa added with a slight smile. Exactly, Damien agreed. Some lessons come at a higher price than others. The restaurant no longer resembled the exclusive fortress it had once been. The newly renamed Eleanor's maintained the elegant aesthetic of its predecessor, but had been transformed in subtle yet significant ways. The lighting was warmer, the artwork on the walls now showcased diverse artists, and the previously rigid formal atmosphere had given way to something equally sophisticated, but far more welcoming. 1 week after Senator Langley's arrest, Damien escorted his mother through the front doors of the establishment that now bore her name. Eleanor, elegant in a deep purple dress, paused just inside the entrance, taking in the changes with visible emotion. "You didn't tell me you were naming it after me," she said softly. "I wanted it to be a surprise," Damien replied, gently squeezing her hand. It seemed fitting considering how this all began. The new manager, Alexis Patterson, a respected restaurant industry veteran with a stellar reputation for both excellence and inclusivity, approached with a warm smile. "Ms. Carter, we're honored to welcome you as our first guest. Your table is ready whenever you are." Eleanor was escorted to the VIP table, the very one she had been denied 2 months earlier. As she sat down, several staff members, including many familiar faces from the previous incarnation of the restaurant, approached to welcome her personally. Most of the service staff stayed on, Damien explained as their drinks were served. They weren't the problem, and many of them suffered under Gareth's management too. Eleanor looked around at the diverse clientele now filling the restaurant, a stark contrast to the homogeneous crowd from before. "It's not just the name that's changed. We implemented a new reservation system that prevents manipulation," Damien explained. "And the pricing is now standardized and transparent. No more discretionary charges applied selectively." Their conversation was interrupted by a familiar face approaching the table. Daniel Williams, now dressed in the attire of a restaurant manager rather than a waiter, smiled broadly. "Ms. Carter, it's wonderful to see you again," he said. "I wanted to personally thank you both. Without what happened that night, none of this would have changed." Eleanor reached out and squeezed his hand. "You took a tremendous risk coming forward. How are your sister and her children doing?" "They're back home now and doing well," Daniel replied. "Alexis offered me the assistant manager position. I'm finishing culinary school at night. He's going to be running his own restaurant someday," Damien predicted. After Daniel departed, Eleanor turned to her son with a thoughtful expression. "You've accomplished something remarkable here, Damien, but at what cost? The Langleys may be finished, but there are others like them." "I know," Damien acknowledged. "This was just one battle. The system that protected them still exists, even if it's been weakened." "And you've made powerful enemies," Eleanor added. "Not everyone exposed in the Langley scandal has faced consequences yet." "That's why the work continues," Damien said, determination evident in his voice. "Eleanor's is just the beginning, a template for how to transform other spaces and institutions." As they enjoyed their meal, various guests stopped by their table to introduce themselves. Some were community leaders Damien had worked with before, while others were new faces, drawn by the restaurant's transformation story which had become national news. "You've created more than just an inclusive restaurant," Eleanor observed. "You've created a symbol," Damien nodded. "That was always the goal. LeBlanc Manor represented everything wrong with exclusive spaces. The arbitrary barriers, the unspoken rules designed to keep certain people out. Eleanor's represents what those spaces could become instead." Their dinner was interrupted by commotion at the entrance. A group of reporters had gathered outside, their attention focused on someone arriving. Through the windows, Damien could see camera flashes and outstretched microphones. Alexis approached their table quickly. "Mr. Carter, Daniel Williams is here to see you. He seems quite agitated." Moments later, Daniel hurried over, his expression a mixture of shock and vindication. "You need to see this," he said, holding up his phone to show a breaking news alert. "They found him." Damien read the headline. "Former LeBlanc Manor waiter provides key evidence in Langley investigation." "That's not me," Daniel clarified quickly. "It's Kevin Blackwell. He worked at LeBlanc Manor 5 years ago but was fired after he complained about discrimination. He's been gathering evidence against the Langleys ever since, waiting for the right moment to come forward." And our situation gave him that opportunity, Damien realized. Daniel nodded eagerly. He has documents going back a decade, records of bribes, secret meetings, even recordings of Senator Langley discussing how to handle people who oppose their interests. It's far worse than anyone realized. The implications were staggering. What had begun as a single act of discrimination against Eleanor had unleashed a cascade of revelations that now threatened to expose corruption at the highest levels of the city's power structure. "He's outside right now," Daniel added, "talking to the press. He's asking to speak with you." Damien exchanged a look with his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Bring him in," Damien instructed. Through the kitchen entrance to avoid the media. Circus. 10 minutes later, Kevin Blackwell was seated at their table. A serious man in his early 40s with the careful demeanor of someone who had carried a heavy secret for too long. "I've been following what you've done, Mr. Carter," he began without preamble. "You accomplished in 2 months what I couldn't manage in 5 years, cracking the Langley family's facade." "You had the evidence all along?" Eleanor asked. Kevin nodded grimly. "After they fired me, I became obsessed with exposing them. I got a job at a company that provided accounting services to several Langley properties, started collecting documents, recordings, anything I could find. But no one would. Listen, the Langleys had too much influence over the media, the police, everyone who could help. Until now," Damien observed. "Until you broke their power enough for people to start questioning," Kevin confirmed. "The material I've provided to federal investigators goes well beyond what's already public. The corruption extends to judges, police officials, regulatory agencies. It's systemic." The conversation continued as Kevin outlined the extent of what he had uncovered. By the time dessert arrived, it was clear that the Langley scandal was about to expand far beyond what anyone had anticipated. As Kevin prepared to leave, to meet with investigators who were now taking his evidence seriously, he paused and turned to Eleanor. "Ms. Carter, what happened to you at LeBlanc Manor happened to me too and to countless others. But most of us couldn't fight back. Thank you for having a son who could." After he departed, Eleanor and Damien sat in contemplative silence for a moment. "This has become much bigger than a restaurant, hasn't it?" Eleanor finally said. "It always was," Damien replied. "The restaurant was just where it became visible." As they finished their meal, Alexis approached with a message. News crews outside were requesting statements from both Damien and Eleanor about the expanding Langley investigation. "Another day," Damien told her. "Tonight is about celebrating. Eleanor's not discussing the Langleys." Later, as they stood on the restaurant's newly redesigned terrace overlooking the city lights, Eleanor turned to her son. "You didn't just fight for me, you know. You fought for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." Damien nodded, thinking about Daniel, Kevin, and countless others who had faced discrimination in spaces designed to exclude them. "The work is just beginning," he said. "What we've exposed goes beyond one family or one restaurant. It's about dismantling systems that have been in place for generations, and building something better in their place," Eleanor added, gesturing to the diverse, vibrant dining room behind them. Back at his penthouse later that night, Damien reviewed the latest updates from Lisa. The fallout from Kevin Blackwell's evidence was spreading rapidly, with 3 judges already announcing unexpected retirements and a deputy mayor taking an indefinite leave of absence. As he prepared for bed, his security system alerted him to a delivery, an unmarked envelope that had been left with his building's doorman. After security had scanned it for dangers, Damien opened it to find a single sheet of paper with the message, "We're watching." He smiled slightly as he tucked the note into his desk drawer. The old guard was trying to intimidate him, not realizing that their time had passed. The systems that had protected them were crumbling, exposed to public scrutiny for perhaps the first time. The next morning, Damien stood on his penthouse balcony, looking out at the city sprawled below. In the distance, he could see Eleanor's, its new sign gleaming in the morning sunlight. What had begun as a personal affront had evolved into something transformative, not just for one restaurant, but potentially for the entire power structure of the city. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "The local news is calling you the man who brought down an empire. I prefer to think of you as the man who's building a better one. Damien smiled as he typed his response. We're just getting started. And they were. The transformation of LeBlanc Manor into Eleanor's represented more than just a name change or new management. It symbolized the possibility of change in even the most entrenched systems, the potential for spaces built on exclusion to become places of genuine welcome and equal treatment. As for the Langleys and others like them, they were learning a lesson that was long overdue. Power built on discrimination and corruption would eventually crumble when confronted with truth and justice. The war wasn't over. There would be resistance, backlash, and attempts to maintain the status quo. But a significant battle had been won, and the momentum was now on the side of change. Damien Carter looked out at his city with renewed purpose. The restaurant named for his mother would stand as a permanent reminder that no one should ever be told they don't belong, and that when such injustice occurs, sometimes the most powerful response is to change the system itself. What would you sacrifice to change a system built on exclusion? Damien Carter risked his empire, but found something far more valuable, a legacy of justice that began with one denied seat. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe for more tales of ordinary moments that spark extraordinary change. Your next favorite story is just one click away.